tell, then you see the road. I'm out to my soul into the sides whenever the smoke clear out of my face and my picture perfect.
Hello and welcome back, fellow anime lovers, to Cypherfics. I am delighted to have you join us once again in the world of fanfiction and fantasy. This is the 6th part of, What If Harry Potter Meets Twilight? Special note, this fanfic is written and a masterpiece of Asian Lion Heart 310 on FANFICTIONnet. Do check and support the author too. Now smash the like, share and subscribe button for more. Also press the bell icon so that you never miss such great parts. Thanks for the introduction. Now let's dive into the world. Mid-March. Harold yawned loudly as he woke up from a good night of sleep. Stretching his muscles, the dark brown-haired young man slowly went out of the bed to head straight to the bathroom. The precedent days had been pretty uneventful so far except with the Cullens and the wolves. When they learned that vampires had been found thanks to Bella who told Alice, Carlisle had instantly ordered his children to patrol their territory every day to be sure that it wouldn't happen again. Bella also told Jacob who instantly told his father who, in return, called Sam to double the patrol in case there were more leeches somewhere. Needless to say that Sam's hatred toward our young hero turned back to vampires after that. A good thing because the mutt was DMN annoying with his glares. After the attack, Harold had told his mother who had been furious about this and it took him a while to explain her that the Cullens were not responsible. In the end, Astrid had told him to tell her if anything happened in the future while also asking him when she could meet his soulmate much to his chagrin and embarrassment. Speaking of Bella, she was still a bit shaken by the fact she had almost been killed by vampires but was slowly growing out of it as another feeling filled her body, determination. After seeing her soulmate dealing with the 3 bloodsuckers, the chocolate-eyed girl wanted to become a werebear so she could defend herself. Harold, of course, was still unsure about this but he accepted to help, he just couldn't say no to her. In the end, after a little call, his mother had promised to ask the elders in case they knew something. While it wasn't the answer he wanted, Harold accepted it for now. Bella hadn't been pleased about it but reluctantly understood as the elders held all knowledge or at least a good part of it. Besides, she could wait a little bit but she was staying as close as possible to him. Charlie even commented once that the two were practically married because of that and had laughed loudly when the two had blushed madly in embarrassment. Jacob, him, had been more open with Harold as they both shared a common hatred, vampires. The young black grew a strong distaste toward Edward Cullen when his friends told him about Alice's warnings. Harold couldn't help but feeling relieved. Bella had 2 strong protectors at her disposal, well more like a powerful bear and a swift wolf at her disposal. A part of that, another thing had changed, Harold's view on some of the Cullens. Alice and Jasper were pretty much kind of enjoyable, the former was fun while the latter had interesting opinions about different types of things. Carlisle and Esme were 2 pretty good to hang out with. The latter seemed to love acting like a maternal figure for everyone, even him. It was, in short, really shocking but not unpleasant. Back to present, our hero stepped out of the shower with a towel wrapped around his waist, sighing in contentment. Harold then made his way back to his room where he dressed. Today, he was wearing a dark blue jean, white socks, a brown belt, a white shirt with a red inscription on it. Bear with me. Ironical, don't you think? Seeing that he is half bear. Anyway, the dark brown-haired young man slowly put on his brown boots before he went back to his feet to look at his reflection in the mirror. Picking up a comb, he slowly used it to comb his hair before using another comb for his beard, which was slowly growing at this point. A few moments later, he putted back the combs before stepping out of the bedroom with a deep sigh. But then he heard a deep growl coming from him and chuckled when he realized that it was in fact, his stomach wanting food. Patting it, Harold climbed downstairs, heading straight toward the kitchen to make some breakfast. On the menu today, it is pancakes with honey and butter. However, while he was cooking, he didn't know that something was going on upstairs. Inside one of the rooms, a large mass of blonde hair started to stir in her sleep. Soon, eyes blinked once, twice before a loud yawn escaped a mouth full of sharp teeth. It was none other than Ayanna, Harold's familiar and best friend. I slept well, she muttered under her breath as she slowly went back on her paws. The blonde bear then froze when a growl escaped her belly. Look like it's time to eat, she whispered to herself with ravishment while licking her lips in anticipation. Looking at her body, she saw that she had lost a good amount of weight as she looked really thin in comparison of before her hibernation. That won't do at all. Determined, Ayanna made her way to the locked door before pressing a paw against the rune on the wood. It glowed yellow for a moment before a clicking sound was heard. The door was unlocked. Smiling, the large blonde bear stepped out of the room she slept in for a while before freezing when a delightful smell reached her nostrils: food. At the same time, Harold, who had just finished preparing his breakfast, froze when he heard something upstairs. After a second, a bright smile appeared on his face as he realized who it could be. Ayanna. Look like Sleeping Beauty is awake, let's welcome her with a feast, he thought to himself as he prepared the salmons and trouts he had kept in a cooler. Just as he putted the honey on a salmon, Ayanna appeared at the kitchen's entrance. Hey Harold. She greeted him with a warm smile as she stepped closer to engulf him in a bear hug. Hey Ai. Welcome back. Here a little something for you, Harold greeted back with a smile as he pointed at the honey-cored half-dozen of trouts and salmon standing nearby. At the sight, Ayanna started drooling madly as she imagined herself wolfing down all this food. But before she did that, she turned her large blonde head to her human before saying those words. Harold? Have I ever told you how much I love you? The dark brown-haired young man raised an eyebrow at those words before harboring a fake look of hurt on his face. You love me just because I feed you, that's not fair, he whispered in a pained tone. However, he soon found himself pulled into a tight hug by the large blonde bear who licked his face repeatedly while saying, I'm sorry. I didn't mean it like this. Harold wanted to say something but her tongue was dangerously close to his mouth, so he kept it closed. But thankfully, he still had the other way, telepathy. Can you please stop? I just took a shower. He screamed at her through their bond. She stopped her licking session to answer with a grin. But I miss doing this with you. Then she started again, covering his face, once again, in her thick warm saliva. Harold sighed internally in defeat and instead let her doing it. He can allow it after a long time without her company. The question was, how long it will take before she release him. Time skip. A few minutes later, 20 to be exact, Harold had to, once again, head to the bathroom to get rid of the drool on his face. When he returned, both him and Ayanna enjoyed their breakfast while talking about the recent events. Needless to say that the blonde bear was in total shock. So let me get this straight, you discovered your soulmate, Ayanna said calmly when he finished talking. Yes. You discovered that there were vampires in Forks and later made a peace treaty with them. Yes again, Harold said with a nod. You also made a treaty with shifters just before the vampires. Hum. And not long ago, your soulmate got attacked by vampires and you killed them all. Ayanna looked at him straight in the eyes. Indeed, the dark brown-haired young man said with a nod. And now she wants to become a werbear like you. Pretty much yeah, Harold retorted in a soft tone while rubbing the back of his head with a hand. You also promised to help her become one. The blonde bear's eyes seemed to narrow at this. Yes, and I will, Harold replied with determination in his blue-green eyes. Ayanna then stayed silent as her mind processed what her human told her. Her eyes were closed and she looked to be deep in though. Harold left her be as he could understand that it was a lot to take in. They both there in silence until the blonde bear reopened her eyes to look at her human with a serious expression on her face. While I am happy that you found your one, I can't help but, Ayanna began to say before pausing when Harold interrupted her by saying with a grin. Being jealous? The blonde bear shot him a glare before going on as if he never spoke. Being worried this vampire, Edward, will stop at nothing until he get your girl. I know, Harold replied with a deep sigh of both annoyance and irritation. Each time he thought or saw the vampire, he wanted nothing more than to tear him apart. But he couldn't thanks to the treaty. However, if Edward entered his territory it was free game. But so far, the DMN vampire hadn't tried to enter his turf. Seeing his discomfort, Ayanna stepped closer to her human before nuzzling his face with her muzzle. He smiled at her before kissing her nose with affection. She returned it by licking his cheek. "You know, I think I really want to meet your soulmate," the blonde bear said to her human with a small smile. "Really?" Harold asked her with contained joy and relief. "Of course. I want to meet the girl who managed to tame the big bad werbear." Ayanna replied back with a grin. Harold's left eye twitched at those words and the sight of his glare caused the blonde bear to laugh loudly with humor. "Ha ha ha, very funny. Do you see the amusement on my face?" "Do you?" he asked her while pointing at his blank face. Ayanna snorted at this but then opened her mouth to say, "Do you mind if I get out? It had been forever since I last walked." "Of course. But stay in the area. If you step out of the domain, one of the Cullens might," Harold said to his familiar with a concerned expression on his face. The blonde bear gently licked his face before responding in a kind tone. "Thank you for the warning, but I will be fine, I promise." With that said, Harold opened the house's front door to let Ayanna out. The blonde bear smiled one last time at him before slowly entering the woods, leaving him behind. He watched her leave from the porch and once she disappeared out of sight, he re-entered his home. It was time for him to do the one thing he hated more than vampires or shifters, homeworks. Groaning in anticipation, the dark brown-haired young man made his way upstairs, heading to his room where he would be for the next 2 hours at most. At the same time, in the forest, Ayanna was peacefully walking. However, as she made her through a world of trees, she was deep in thought. While she was happy that her human got to find his one, Astrid had explained to her of this soulmate thing, the blonde bear couldn't help but being a bit jealous. Until recently, she had been Harold's world. Astrid doesn't count as she is her human's mother and the only female he was with. But now, he had a new one and it happened to be his soulmate. At first she thought that it would mean that he would forget about her but quickly brushed those thoughts aside. Harold loved her as much as she loved him. They had been friends for years and he was the one who raised her alongside Astrid, of course, to be the bear she is today. He had been nothing but nice to him even if his pranks were sometimes pretty annoying. But Ayanna would never hold a grudge against him even if she wanted to. He was her brother and she was his sister, regardless of the species or the BLD. That's why she wasn't totally pleased with the news of him being with another girl. Ayanna, however, will wait to meet the girl before having an opinion on her. Sighing deeply, the blonde bear then resumed her walk, her dark thoughts fading away as she listened to the sound of nature around her. A sound she missed dearly during her hibernation. Time skip. Back to Harold, he was relieved. Finally over. He cried out loudly to himself as he putted down his pen on the side on his desk. 2 hours of sufferings and headaches because of those Callisto's forsaken homeworks. But thankfully, he managed to survive. Using a little towel he kept for good measures, he wiped the sweats out of his forehead as he went back on his feet. Sighing again in pure relief, Harold then glanced at his clock and he saw that it had indeed been less than 2 hours since he started those dreaded homeworks. As he wondered what he should do next, he heard the telephone ringing downstairs. As quick as wind, the dark brown-haired young man rushed down the stairs before picking up the phone just as it was about to stop. "Harold Anderson's residence. Hello," he said with curiosity and interesting, wondering who was calling him. He quickly got his answer when a familiar voice responded to him through the device. "Hello, son." It was his mother, Astrid Anderson. "Hey Mom, how are you?" he asked her with a smile of affection. "I'm fine, thank you for asking, dear. What about you? Are you eating properly? Is Ayanna awake? Are the leeches or the mutts give you a hard time?" At first her tone was filled with love but then it turned more into maternal concern. While he was still an adult by their laws, that didn't stop a mother for worrying. Especially when it concerned their cubs. Harold felt his cheek reddening at the flux of questions from his mother and took a second to answer in a calm and soft tone. Yes, Mir, I am eating properly, and yes, Ayana woke up right this morning. As for the last question, they are keeping their parts of the accord. Good, Astrid replied with a neutral tone that sent shivers down his spine. How are Afi and Amma? And Einar? Harold asked her in an attempt to change the subject. His grand family were not like when he first met them. They were getting old but still far away, dying. Unlike Einar, it won't be long before he joined the Great Bear in the sky. They are still alive, but Uncle Einar isn't going better. In fact, he is. Astrid's voice broke at that. Harold felt tears appearing in his eyes. While he knew that the shaman was close to death, the mere idea of losing him it both frightened and saddened him to no end. What about Afi and Amma? He asked her in a tiny voice. They are still strong, but Mir is concerned for her older brother. She said that he might not live past this year. His heart clenched at those words, and Harold closed his eyes in sorrow. He loved Einar dearly, but he knew that he cannot stop him from going in the afterlife. All things had to come to an end, either we want it or not. I will call them later, he whispered softly in a broken tone. They will be delighted to hear you, I'm sure of it, dear, Astrid's voice responded through the phone. Otherwise, is there anything else you want to talk about, Mom? Harold asked her after a moment of awkward silence. Yes, Einar told me about a ritual once that can help your soulmate to become one of us. At those words, Harold's eyes shined with interest. Really? Yes, dear. However, we cannot perform it until April. Why? He asked her with a frown of confusion. Because April is the time when a certain constellation is best visible. Harold frowned in confusion for a moment, but then he glanced at his hand, where his birthmark stood, and a flash of realization passed through his blue-green eyes. Ursa Major. Indeed, sweetheart. Sadly, I cannot tell you more as I don't know how it is done, Astrid said with a tone of sadness and disappointment. It's fine, Mom. I understand, he said to her with a warm tone. Thank you, my child. Anything for you, Mom, Harold whispered to her warmly. Now, how are things with your girl? Astrid suddenly asked him with a playful tone, and he could imagine her grinning on the other side of the phone. Mum. The dark brown-haired young man whined with embarrassment while Astrid only laughed with amusement. Time skip. It was the end of the evening when Harold received a familiar visitor. He was playing with his guitar, the same guitar his grandmother Karina offered him years ago when he turned 11. He was playing a song he heard in a movie that recently came out of cinema, Brother Bear, a Disney movie. He particularly enjoyed it and he liked the songs. The one he was currently playing was Look Through My Eyes. He was only playing when he smelt someone entering his domain. This sweet smell could only belong to one person, Isabella, his beloved soulmate. With a smirk, he decided to play louder while opening his mouth to sing. There are things in life you'll learn, and oh, in time you'll see 'cause out there somewhere it's all waiting if you keep believing, so don't run, don't hide, it will be alright, you'll see, trust me, I'll be there, watching over you. Just take a look through my eyes. There's a better place somewhere out there, I'll just take a look through my eyes, everything changes, you'll be amazed what you'll find, there's a better place if you look through my eyes. There will be times on this journey. All you'll see is darkness out there somewhere, daylight finds you if you keep believing, so don't run, don't hide, it will be alright, you'll see, trust me, I'll be there, watching over you. At the same time, Bella was approaching her boyfriend's soulmate's home only to froze when she heard someone singing. Recognizing the voice as Harold's, she stepped closer, mesmerized by the song. She wasn't the only one as, in the house, Ayana woke up from her small nap at the sound of her human's voice and started to climb downstairs, wanting to listen more. Back to Bella, she was now standing in front of the garage where she saw Harold playing a guitar. The chocolate-eyed girl found this very attractive as her soulmate looked even hotter with the instrument. The fact that he sang like a god was another adding factor. She leaned against the wall to listen to him, smiling as she recognized the song. She was unaware that a blonde bear was also listening from behind her. Ayana completely ignored Bella as her attention was on her human. She had missed listening to his guitar. Seeing them, Harold paused for a second as he gazed at the two before resuming his song. Just take a look, take a look. Through my eyes there's a better place somewhere out there. I'll just take a look through my eyes, everything changes, you'll be amazed what you'll find, there's a better place if you look through my eyes. All the things that you can change. There's a meaning in everything and you will find all you need, there's so much to understand. Take a look, take a look. Through my eyes there's a better place somewhere out there. I'll just take a look through my eyes, everything changes, you'll be amazed what you'll find, you'll be amazed what you'll find. Oh, just take a look, take a look. Through my eyes there's a better place somewhere out there, just take a look through my eyes, everything changes, you'll be amazed what you'll find a better place if you look through my eyes, a better place, just take a look through my eyes, ow, there's a better place if you look through my eyes. Take a look through my eyes. At the last phrase, he stopped singing and playing with a sigh. When he looked up, he saw Bella clapping at him with a bright smile on her face as she stepped closer to him. I didn't know you could sing so well, she said to him after giving him a kiss on the lips. I'm a man of many talent and I see you met Ayanna, Harold replied back before looking at the blonde bear standing at the entrance. Bella blinked at those words before turning her head and freezing in shock when her chocolate eyes landed on a large blonde grizzly bear, but not as much as Harold's bear form. She wanted to scream but then saw Harold slowly going back on his feet to approach the large mammal to caress its head in an affectionate manner. The bear, for its part, growled back softly before looking at her inquisitively. Come closer, she won't bite, Harold encouraged his soulmate while caressing the blonde bear's back. Bella glanced at him with hesitation before gathering all her courage to step closer. She stopped right in front of it and glanced at Harold, unsure of what to do next. You can pet her, she won't mind, right? Harold asked his familiar, who said through their bond. As long as she doesn't pull on my hair. Bella looked again unsure of this, but after seeing how calm her boyfriend was, she slowly reached forward to press her hands against the furry head of the bear. It was soft to the touch and a soft growl of pleasure erupted from its throat. Keep going, Harold gently said to her, and she did just that, using both her hands to caress the bear. I like her. She knows how to pet. Ayanna growled in pleasure as she closed her eyes to enjoy the petting session. Harold rolled his eyes in amusement when he heard this but stayed silent. Amazing, Bella whispered in awe as she caressed the mammal before looking at her soulmate who was smiling at the scene. Is she dash? Yes, Ayanna is my familiar and my best friend, Harold responded to her while glancing at the blonde bear at the last part. Ayanna shot him a warm look before slowly pulling herself away from Bella's hands. She is gorgeous, the young woman commented, and the blonde bear puffed her chest proudly while Harold rolled his eyes in mock annoyance. Great, now her head is going to get bigger, he muttered with fake despair. Bella giggled when Ayanna turned her large head toward her human, growling a bit. Do you want to have your head in my mouth again, Harold Anderson? The blonde bear asked him in an evil tone. The dark brown-haired young man flinched at the reminder and shook his head rapidly. I thought so, Ayanna huffed with satisfaction as she turned away to leave the garage. Where is she going? Bella asked her soulmate with a raised brow, wondering what just happened. Don't know, knowing her, Ai would either go to the river or in her room to sleep, Harold replied with a shrug. Bella blinked at the answer but couldn't ask what she had in mind when her boyfriend spoke again. I have good news for you. Tell me, she inquired him with a curious raised brow. I received a call from Mom, there's a ritual we can perform to make you a werbear, Harold said in a soft tone while looking at her in the eyes. Really? Bella asked loudly in joy and surprise. Yes, but you will have to wait until April, something about the Ursa Major being the best visible, Harold added with a smile and a shrug at the last part. Bella Swan, while she didn't like the idea of waiting, looked overjoyed as she literally flung to her boyfriend to kiss the hell out of him. Harold internally chuckled as he returned the kiss, deepening it a bit as he embraced her. They stayed like this for a moment before a soft roar echoed from the house. Harold. I'm hungry. It was Ayanna. I'm coming, you big glutton. Harold replied through their bond, both amused and annoyed by her interruption. Look like it's dinner time, the dark brown-haired young man commented with a chuckle as he pulled his lips away from Bella's, who pouted at this. "Want to join us?" he asked her with a charming smile that instantly caught her heart. "Who would be dumb enough to refuse your cooking, Harold Anderson?" Bella responded back playfully with a giggle. "Well, then we should go inside before Ayanna becomes impatient," Harold responded with a chuckle as he putted his guitar back to his place. Then the two youngsters made their way out of the garage before heading to the main home so they could have dinner together alongside the blonde bear. Time passed as it was already mid-April and Harold had just returned from a hard day of school. Thankfully, tomorrow was Saturday, so he can relax as much as he wanted. Especially since things had been pretty tense at school lately. Why? Mostly because of Edward Cullen. The vampire had tried to talk with Bella each time she was alone, which was a bit rare seeing that she was almost always with him, but, much to Harold's joy, his soulmate either ignored him or sneered at him. However, this seemed to anger the vampire greatly, as after 4 refusals he had tried to be more forceful. Harold's eyes narrowed as he remembered that day just as he clenched his fists in anger. Flashback. 2 days had passed since Bella encountered Ayanna. It was a normal Tuesday at school with Harold and Bella sitting at their favorite place in the cafeteria, ready to enjoy their lunches. They were soon joined by a couple of Bella's friends, Angela and Jessica. Away from them, Alice waved at the duo while Jasper gave them a respectful nod, which Harold returned in kind. At first things were good, but then, just as they finished their meals, a certain someone approached them. It was Edward. The vampire looked confident and calm, which was strange, but his attention was focused on Bella and her only. That sent alarms to Harold, whose eyes narrowed dangerously as he eyed the vampire. "Bella, can I talk to you please?" Edward asked the chocolate-eyed young woman in a calm tone. Angela and Jessica stopped chatting to look at them with both curiosity and interest while glancing at Harold from time to time. Like many students here, they both knew the animosity between Harold and Edward and wondered how long it will take before things turn ugly. Bella released an annoyed sigh as she shot an irritated look at her soulmate boyfriend before looking at the vampire dead in the eyes. "No, you can't," she retorted to him in a calm tone of her own, but we could clearly hear the annoyance in her tone. "Please, is it import dash?" Edward began to say back in an attempt to convince her, but was interrupted by a certain dark brown-haired young man we love. She said, "No, you idiot. Can't you understand it?" Edward's eyes landed on him with an expression of anger mixed with annoyance. The vampire opened his mouth to retort, but Harold was quicker. "You know what? I already know the answer. You are too stupid to understand such simple words." Edward's face showed nothing but anger and rage as he snarled with pure disgust and loath. "Stay out of it, you freak. It's between me and Bella." The word freak bring back memories of his time with the Dursleys, and a strong anger slowly grew into his heart as he slowly went back on his feet. Edward was 6 feet 2 inches in height, but Harold was taller thanks to him being 6 feet 5 inches, so he towered the vampire by a few inches. "Funny coming from you, don't you think?" Harold dangerously said to him with narrowed eyes. Edward tensed at this but growled in hatred, ignoring the fact that everyone in the cafeteria were now looking at them with anticipation. The vampire and the werbear were glaring daggers at one another, trying to intimidate the others, but none backed down. "You do not want this fight," Harold told him in a deep stern tone that sent shivers down everyone's spine, except Edward's. "I'm pretty sure I do," the vampire responded in a calm tone before slapped him in the face. The crowd gasped in shock at what Edward just did. Harold, while surprised by this turn of event, was still standing there, his face turned to the left before he slowly looked back at the vampire, who looked a bit shocked about something. Not that he cared anyway. "Leave now," Harold told him calmly, but his tone was cold and harsh as if he was containing his rage. Why? Because he didn't want to create a scene at school to end up expelled. If Edward did this when they were somewhere else, Harold would gladly teach him his place, but at school it was almost impossible. "Otherwise what? What will you do?" Edward taunted him with a sneer before punching him on the face with his left hand. "Edward, stop it!" Jasper cried out as he went back on his feet alongside Emmett and the girls. "Stop, you idiot!" Rosalie called out to him. Alice had her hands on her mouth as she looked at the scene with horror, and Emmett looked shocked by what was currently happening. But Edward ignored them as he used his other hand to punch Harold in the gut before using his left one to slap his enemy in the face. Much to everyone's shock, the dark brown-haired young man stood perfectly still, not even grunting in pain at the punches. However, at each punches he received, Harold's rage was growing, and the slap was the last straw. To hell with this. Consequences be damned. Edward, seeing his enemy unmoving, readied his left arm to throw another punch to his face, but when he launched his fist forward, Harold's right hand quickly grabbed it before it could touch him. The vampire tried to pull his hand away from the werebear's grip but gasped in pain when Harold tightened his hold, which caused him to fall on his knees. "I warned you," Harold told him coldly before using his left hand to punch him in the guts. However, he hadn't controlled his strength, so he sent his enemy crashing against a wall, fracturing it a bit. The crowd gasped in shock when Edward fell on the ground with a grunt of pain. Harold slowly went to pummel him a bit more when someone stepped before him. "Harold. That's enough. I think you will not bother us anymore." Bella begged him as she putted a hand on his chest. Harold stared at his soulmate's eyes for a second before nodding. "Very well, he can live," he said with a reluctant tone. Alice and Jasper, along with Rosalie and Emmett, all sighed in relief at those words. Most of the crowd were still staring at him, either with fear, fascination, or amazement, but he ignored them as he added in the coldest tone he could muster. "For now." Everyone shivered at the tone, and they all flinched when the bell was heard. It was time for classes. Giving one last glare at Edward, who was pulling back on his feet by Jasper and Emmett, Harold then left the cafeteria without looking back. People scattered out of his way, afraid of being the next target of his anger. Some students were looking at Edward with dark glares or sneers as they all saw that he was the one who started all this. Bella was about to follow her boyfriend when Alice approached her. "I'm sorry for Edward the First," the pixie-like vampire began to say in a soft tone, but Bella stopped her. "That's fine, you are not responsible, but if I were, I would stay away from Harold for the time being." Alice nodded before leaving after a little wave to Bella, who watched her go with a sigh before running after her soulmate to calm him down. End of flashback. After the fight, he had been called to the principal's office, and because he had punched Edward, he had to serve detention for a week. Edward had an harsher punishment. He was now allowed in the school for a month. Carlisle and Esme were furious for what he did once their children told them what happened, and the two parents apologized to Harold for Harold's actions, hoping that the treaty wasn't broken because of this incident. However, much to their relief, Harold held no grudge against them but told them to keep a better leash on Edward, because the next time it happened, he will not hesitate to end him. Carlisle and Esme instantly accepted while being a bit afraid of the threat. Edward was now confined at home, where he wasn't allowed to leave until he could return to school. The young vampire had suffered for days from the punch he received from Harold, and even then he could tell that the young man had not unleashed his full strength. However, a part of the pain, he also felt something else: vengeance. Bella rejected him, Harold punched him and humiliated him a lot of times. They must pay, not matter what he had to do. He will make Bella his and his only. He didn't know it, but things were about to change, things he will not like at all. Back to Harold, he was sitting on the sofa, enjoying its softness. But then a new voice caught his attention. Hard day at school. It was Ayanna. She got some weight since she woke up from her hibernation, but another thing changed. The blonde bear looked more active and took many trips into the forest whenever Harold was not around. After all, she couldn't just stay there doing nothing. School no, the students yes, Harold retorted with a growl of annoyance. Ever since he punched Edward, his popularity grew a bit more. He was now seen as the strongest man at school. Apparently, no many could send someone crashing against a wall with a punch unless breaking say wall. The girls were sometimes heard cursing Bella for having such a man as her boyfriend, while the boys were jealous to not be as strong as he was. All of them now knew that he must never be angered unless they wanted to become like Edward. While his newly found popularity was annoying, Harold took comfort that Edward was enduring the total opposite. Why? The vampire was the one who started the fight and had been acting like a JRK to Harold ever since their first encounter. Every student knew it and some had been betting about how long it would take before a fight broke. Since the confrontation at the cafeteria, the name Edward Cullen was said with disdain or with a scowl. Alice, Jasper, Emmett and Rosalie had pretty much received sympathetic looks from some people. Needless to say that Rosalie, who usually loved attention, had cursed Edward for the scene he made that day because she hated being pitted by others. Harold had particularly enjoying hearing how his enemy got yelled on by the entire family. "SCK to be you," Ayanna said with mock compassion, and he glared at her in response. Sadly, she only giggled in amusement, not intimidated in the slightest. But then her expression turned serious as she asked next. "Do you have news about this Edward guy?" "Yes, Alice told me he was still not allowed out of their home except to hunt, but even then he is escorted by at last 2 members of the family," Harold replied with a scowl. He hated speaking about Edward Cullen. "How was your day, Ai?" Harold asked her with a curious raised brow, trying to change the subject. "Pretty uneventful. I made a friend today," the blonde bear began to say before being interrupted by her human. "Wait, really? Another grizzly bear?" "Nah, a black bear. Her name is Chenoa. Apparently, she moved in the area to escape the pale humans with yellow eyes," Ayanna responded with a look of understanding. "I see. Can't say I blame her. Anything else?" Harold asked her curiously. "Yes, she warned me that a cougar had taken residence west from here. His name is Torque, and from what she said, he is not one to be messed with. I don't think he will try anything against us. You are a big grizzly bear after all, and me a were bear. A mere cougar is not match against us," Harold replied with a shrug. "Maybe, but just in case, we should still mark our borders." Ayanna stared at him with a serious expression on her face. "We will not because of the cougar, but to be sure the mutts won't try to intrude," Harold retorted with a sigh. "Good, now can we eat?" Ayanna asked with puppy dog eyes as she titled her head to the side. "You really are a big glutton, do you know that?" Harold asked her with amusement. "And proud of it." The blonde bear replied proudly while puffing her chest. The dark brown-haired young man rolled his eyes with amusement but went back on his feet. "All right then, I think I have some salmons left for you," Harold said while making his way to the kitchen. Hearing the word salmons caused Ayanna to start drooling in anticipation. Like Harold, salmon was her favorite fish. As her human was in the kitchen, the blonde bear laid near the sofa, waiting for her food to come. However, as she waited, she couldn't help but feeling that something bad was coming in the future. She didn't know it, but it will be the case, but thankfully, not before a long time. Time skip. The next day, Harold was watching TV with his familiar. They were both watching their favorite emission, National Geographic. It was the end of the morning and Harold had already finished his homeworks, so they had the entire day for themselves. However, their little moment was broken when someone knocked at the door. "Coming!" Harold called out as he slowly went to the front door, wondering who it was. "Anderson's residence, what can I do?" Harold began to say as he opened the door before freezing when he saw who was outside. 4 people were there, standing in front of him along with an old elk, a female bobcat, a male crow and a female bald eagle. He would recognize them anywhere and tears started to fall from his eyes at the sight of them. "Mom," he whispered softly in surprise and delight at the view of his mother who looked as radiant as ever. "Harold, my baby boy." Astrid cried out in joy as she pulled her son into a tight hug, kissing his cheek repeatedly. Harold embraced her back, happy to finally see his mother again after so long. "I missed you, Mom," he whispered softly to her, and she smiled warmly as she pulled herself away from his arms, staring at him with maternal love in her dark green eyes. "I missed you too, son," she cooed back as she caressed his cheek with a hand. "Hey, Aspen, still as gorgeous as ever," he said to the bald eagle, who ruffled her feathers with pride at the comment before nuzzling his hair with her beak. Harold then looked at the other people. While they got more wrinkles and white hairs, they were still the same. Afi Ama, the dark brown-haired young man, greeted his grandparents with a joyful smile on his face. "Dotterbarn. Come give your grandma a hug. Karina cooed as she opened her arms welcomely. Harold, of course, hugged her gently as tears fell more from his eyes. I missed you, Grandma, Harold said to the old woman with a warm smile. I missed you too, little one, Karina replied back gently to her grandson. Hey Ira, how are you, girl? Harold cooed to his grandmother's familiar who was rubbing herself against him, purring loudly. He sure missed this bobcat. Then he looked at Njord, his grandfather, who had stepped closer. Hey kiddo. He greeted his grandson with a small laugh while embracing him. Hey grandpa. Hey Munin. Harold greeted back with a smile on his own. The crow cawed in greeting, happy to see the young man again. Look at you. You are as strong as the last time I saw you. Njord commented while looking at his grandson with pride. I could say the same about you. And Grandma, you are as gorgeous as ever. Aw, thank you dear, Karina cooed at him with a smile, appreciating the compliment. What about me? Astrid asked him while having her hands on her peach, staring at him with a raised brow. Mom, you know you are the most appealing woman of the world, Harold retorted to her with affection. And don't forget it. His mother said with a hint of arrogance in her tone as she puffed her chest with pride. Harold, Njord and Karina all laughed with humor at this, but then the former turned his head to look at the last person present. Einar looked very tired. Sure, he was still tall and strong, but still he looked older than he should. Apparently, when Harold had started school at Forks, Einar became sick and Karina had to go to Oregon to heal him. And while he recovered, he was now weaker than before. Sure, he still performed rituals or shamanic stuffs, but he was not as energetic as before. Age seemed to have caught up with him. Hey Einar, how are you, old man? He asked the shaman with a small smile. Einar glared at him with mock anger. I may be old, but I'm still strong enough to kick your ass, brat. His answer caused everyone to laugh with humor, only to stop when Einar started to cough. Karina was instantly at his side, helping him. Maybe we should get inside, Harold commented while leading everyone in his home, to the living room where a certain blonde bear was. Hey Ayana, Astrid greeted gently upon seeing the bear. Hey, Ayana growled back with affection as she rubbed her head against her human's mother. Make yourself at home, everyone. Do you want something? Coffee? Tea? Harold asked his guests as Karina helped her brother to seat on the sofa. Coffee for me please dear, Astrid told him gently while making herself comfortable. Me too lad, Njord said while sitting near his daughter. A green tea for me daughterbarn, Karina said while sitting near her older brother, who said softly. A hot chocolate for me. 2 hot chocolates, 2 coffees and a green tea, understood. Harold cried out with a nod before rushing toward the kitchen to prepare the drinks. What about me? Ayana called out to her human, outraged that he hadn't asked her. You get water. Harold's voice responded from the kitchen. The blonde bear's eyes narrowed at this. Hey Harold. Just kidding. You have honey. The dark brown-haired young man said from the kitchen. Good, Ayana huffed with satisfaction. A few minutes later, Harold returned with the drinks and served them to his guests, who all thanked him for it. The blonde bear had thanked him for the honey by licking his whole face with her tongue, much to everyone's amusement and his annoyance. So dear, where is this soulmate of yours? I can't wait to meet her. Karina asked her grandson with a teen-like squeal. She is with her father. I don't know if she planned to come, to be honest. Beside, why are you all here? Not that I mind, of course. Harold responded calmly while taking a sip of his hot chocolate. Don't tell me you already forgot. Astrid inquired him with a raised brow. Harold stared blankly at her before a flash of remembrance passed through his eyes. Slapping his forehead with a hand, he grumbled something inaudible under his breath before looking back at his guests. To my defense, you didn't told when you would come to perform the ritual, so. Fair enough, Astrid agreed with a shrug. Njord and Karina took a sip of their own drinks before looking back at the people present. She needs to be here, Einar said from his seat in a grave tone. Harold nodded at the old man before going back on his feet. "I will call her." Then he went to the phone where he composed Bella's number. For a few seconds, no one answered the call, but then. "Hello." It was a masculine voice and pretty familiar to him. "Mr. Swan. Sorry to bother you, but is your daughter at home? I need to speak with her. I told you you can call me Charlie." "But yes, she is. Can you wait a minute?" "Yes, I can," Harold responded to his girlfriend's father in a calm tone. He could hear Charlie calling out Bella's name along with a short discussion between the two before his soulmate's voice echoed through the phone. "Harold? Hey love. Sorry to bother you, but," he was interrupted by Bella, who brushed his concern aside by saying. "That's fine. Charlie said you wanted to talk to me." "Yes, is he with you?" "No, he left to give us some privacy." "Good. Do you remember our little agreement?" For a second, nothing was heard from the other side. "Which one?" "About something you wanted to become." Another second of silence before an answer. "Are you saying dash?" "Yes. My granduncle is here to perform the ritual. We just need the guest of honor," Harold responded with a teasing grin. However, he quickly pulled his ear away from the phone when he heard Bella squealing loudly from the other side. "I will be there in an hour." By the tone of her voice, she looked excited, a bit too much maybe. "Ask your father first at least," Harold reminded her in a scowling tone. "Oh right. Early." He heard her calling her father and he couldn't help but chuckle with amusement. He could hear a muffled conversation through the phone, but sadly, he couldn't understand what was being said. For a moment, he just stood there, listening until Bella's voice echoed again through the phone. "Charlie gave me permission." "Wonderful. See you soon, sunshine," he said to her in a charming tone. "See you soon, my strong teddy bear," he heard her saying on the other side. He hung up the phone before putting it back to its place. Harold then went back to the living room where everyone stopped chatting to look at him. "She is coming," Harold announced them with a smile. "Wonderful. I will finally meet my future daughter-in-law," Astrid cried out with a grin. Harold blushed madly at his mother's words, and it reddened even more when she added, "After all, it is my duty as mother to decide if she is worthy enough to be with my baby boy." "Mom." Harold cried out in pure embarrassment while everyone laughed with amusement at the scene, even the familiars. "I hate you all," he grumbled to them, but it only caused everyone to laugh even louder. "No you don't," Ayana cooed to him while licking the right side of his face, covering it with her saliva. "Not again." "Stop." Harold cried out to his familiar, who gave him another lick before walking away with a smirk on her muzzle. "Bloody bear, gonna be the death of me," he grumbled under his beard before yelping when Astrid slapped the back of his head. "Language, mister." A chorus of laughs echoed afterwards, and Harold once again felt like the world was against him. He just hoped that sweet Bella wouldn't be like them when she arrived. Time skip. It's official, he was cursed. A few moments ago, Bella Swan had arrived home where she was greeted by Harold's entire family. Karina had welcomed her warmly and Jord did the same. Bella had been kinda spooked by the animals present, but once she learned that they were familiars, she calmed down. However, as he feared, Astrid had taken his girlfriend aside barely 5 minutes after her arrival to have a discussion with her. When she returned, Bella looked a bit scared, but Astrid simply told him when she passed near him. "You choose well, dear." At least she approved of Bella, but sadly for him, things became worse when Astrid started to tell her some embarrassing stories about him. He had never blushed so much in his life. Mothers could be cruel when they wanted to be. Worse, Astrid, and soon Karina, started to tell his girlfriend about how cute he was when he was younger. Going as far as to show her pictures from their phones. He had never been so embarrassed in his life. Thankfully, he was saved by Einar, who abruptly went back on his feet with a grave look on his face. "It is time." Njord, Karina, Astrid, Bella and Harold all looked at one another, understanding that it was time to perform the ritual. Heading outside, they all went to stand in the clearing right in front of Harold's porch. They watched as Einar drew a large circle on the ground before looking up. Harold, along with everyone, did the same, and he saw it, shining brightly in the sky, was the constellation he and his kind literally worshipped, the Ursa Major, the Great Bear. "May the girl enter the circle?" The shaman's grave tone said to Bella, who gulped nervously as she stood near her boyfriend. "Go on, everything will be fine," the dark brown-haired young man whispered to her with a comforting smile. Bella smiled back at him, silently thanking him for his support before taking a deep breath as she made her way to the center of the circle. Her chocolate eyes looked back at Harold, who gave her a small smile of encouragement. Taking a deep breath, Bella then looked at her soulmate's granduncle before saying calmly, "I'm ready." Nodding at her, Einar then opened his mouth to say to the sky. Bella, sadly, didn't understand what was being said, but Harold did. "We are gathered here today to welcome a new addition to our noble family. Great Callisto, this young woman wants to walk among us as one of your children." In the sky, the constellation brightened slightly as Einar spoke. "O Great Bear, allow this person to become a member of your noble people." At those words, a ray of light shot straight toward Bella, who gasped in shock when found herself surrounded by it. Looking around, she saw that she cannot see anyone and was starting to panic. "My child," a deep feminine voice echoed from above, and she looked up to see a transparent woman looking at her with warmth. What? He mumbled in shock at what was going on. "Are you ready to give up your humanity to become one of my children?" the transparent woman asked her in a maternal and kind tone. Understanding that this woman was none other than Callisto, Bella took a moment to answer, but when she did, her voice showed nothing but calm and determination. "Yes." Callisto smiled at the young woman but then opened her mouth to ask her. "Tell me why you want to become a werbear." Taken aback by the question, Bella took a second to think about the best answer to give. A few seconds later, the chocolate-eyed young woman looked up at the spirit deity. Before saying, "I want to become like the man I love. I want to become a bear to be stronger. I want to be one so I could stay with Harold forever." The answer seemed to please Callisto, whose smile widened as she said those words. "So be it." Suddenly, Bella found herself being lifted by an unknown force, heading toward Callisto, whose smile hadn't disappeared. The young woman wanted to scream in fear, but no sound could come out of her mouth as she went higher and higher into the sky. However, just as she was about to touch Callisto, the spirit disappeared to be replaced by a transparent bear head. When Bella reached it, she had to close her eyes as she was engulfed into a bright light just as pain started to spread through her body. She could clearly hear her bones popping or shifting, but at first it was tolerable for 30 seconds. Bella couldn't retain herself anymore as the pain was becoming too much and opened her mouth to cry, but instead, a guttural roar was heard. Meanwhile, Harold, Njord, Karina and Einar along with their familiars couldn't see the young woman as she was inside a column of light, but they could hear her. When they heard the roar, they looked at one another with happiness. Soon enough, the column dissipated to reveal a massive bear with reddish-brown fur slowly descending from the sky to soon being deposited in the circle by an unknown force. Staring at the sky, Harold saw that the constellation wasn't as bright as it was a moment ago, but brushed it aside to stare at the massive bear in front of him. Without hesitation, Harold turned into his full bear form before stepping closer to the unmoving form in the circle. Under the light of the stars, the reddish-brown bear looked magnificent. After a quick inspection, Harold could say that Bella's bear form was smaller than his or his mother's. "Bella?" he called softly as he stopped at her side. A little growl escaped the reddish-brown she-bear's throat as she raised her head. When she opened her eyes, Harold was delighted to see they were still chocolate in color. Speaking of eyes, Bella looked at her hands only to blink when she saw clawed paws instead. Looking up at him, she shot him a bright smile. "How do I look?" "Like a bear. Except she gave you antlers." Harold responded with a straight face at the last part. Bella gaped at him before her eyes went up to see the top of her head. "What? Got you?" Harold replied back before laughing as he tapped her on the shoulder. Bella laughed as well before going back on her paws. In her new form, she stood 7 feet tall, but when she went on her hind legs to hug her boyfriend, she stood 14 feet tall. Harold and her circled each other, laughing with delight as the others watched the scene with amusement. Bella was overjoyed. She was now a werebear. She took a second to feel her new body. She felt stronger, she felt like she could lift mountains. However, she quickly brushed her thoughts aside when Harold gently touched her on the shoulder, saying, "Tag, you are hit. Get back here." She roared with playfulness while laughing loudly. However, what they didn't know was that the two of them were being watched by Callisto, who harbored a warm smile on her face before disappearing. As the two lovers played together, they didn't know that many things were about to happen, both good and bad. Early June. The days following Bella's transformation into a werebear were in short pretty busy. Not because of school's work or anything, but because Harold had to teach his soulmate how to get used to her new appearances, both human, full bear, and humanoid bear. Using the little vacation they had, our young hero had to teach the love of his life how to use her other forms. Much to Harold's shock, Bella had no trouble with her newly acquired forms, especially her full bear form. She quickly learned the basic as if she was literally born a werebear. But just the basics such as running, walking, roaring, etc. Other things like how to mark a territory, hunt, fish and fight was another matter. Harold had been amused during a fishing lesson when a salmon literally slapped Bella on the face. Speaking of his soulmate. After the transformation, Bella had been shocked, once she turned back into a human, to see that she had grown a bit. No longer was she a 5 feet 4 inches tall girl, she was now 5 feet 9 inches. But her shock turned into pleasure as she now enjoyed her new size. She was almost as big as her father, so he might possibly not treat her as a child anymore. Speaking of Charlie, when she came back home the day following her transformation, he had pretty shocked by her new size but only assumed that she had a growth spurt during the night. Bella was pained to not tell him what really happened, but she had to hid it from him. A part of her size, she also gained some muscles, albeit barely noticeable unless someone had good eyes. 2 days after that fateful night, when Jacob went to visit her, he himself had been shocked by her new appearance. She was an inch smaller than him. Once again, she had to hide what happened that night, even if she was dying to tell her best friend about it. Jacob spoke with Harold afterwards and asked him questions about Bella's new appearance. The dark brown-haired young man couldn't say much, so he just said that he and his family managed to turn her into a werebear like she wanted. Jacob had been a bit intrigued by those words but had not pressed on as it wasn't really his problem. Besides, as long as Bella is happy, then there was nothing to worry about. A part of this, things were good. Bella was officially a member of Harold's family. Karina and Astrid loved her, even if the latter had menaced her to skin her alive if she hurt her beloved son. Njord was alright in Bella's book. He was friendly but not as much as his wife or daughter. The familiars Ayana, Ira Karina's bobcat, Aspen Astrid's bald eagle and Munin Njord's crow all liked her, and Bella hoped that one day, she would also get a familiar of her own. Einar was, well, she had no words to describe him. She didn't get to interact much with the old man, as right after the ceremony, he disappeared along with this elk. The dark brown-haired young man had been a bit pained when his entire family left the following day to return to their own territory, but he knew that they couldn't stay here with him forever. He promised to call them as often as he could, and they all appreciate it. Astrid, much to his eternal embarrassment, had bluntly told her son to not give her some grandchildren any time soon. Even Bella had been red in embarrassment at the comment. At this moment, Harold wanted nothing more than to bury his head underground like an ostrich. Anyway, Harold was happy that his soulmate was approved by his entire family and had thought for a moment that nothing could destroy his happiness or Bella's in that matter. They were both wrong. 2 weeks after the transformation, when they returned to school, many students had been shocked by Bella's new size, but otherwise they said nothing, as like Charlie, they assumed that Bella had a growth spurt. Alice had instantly whined in jealousy at the fact she wasn't as tall as Bella, but was happy to hear that her friend was now like the man she loved. Emmett was not even more cautious around the young woman, and Rosalie tried to comfort him while shooting apologizing glance to the werebears. Ever since that moment where Edward punched Harold, Rosalie acted kinder. Now as much as Alice but close. Emmett, him, tried to act more civil with Harold and the two acted cordial with one another. However, that didn't stop him from being uneasy around Harold. Jasper didn't look surprised when Bella told them that she was now like Harold, seeing how close the two were, but did congratulated the two. However, a certain someone didn't share such feelings once he found out. Who was it, you may ask? It was none other than the vampire who had tried countless of time to talk with Bella Swan and had been acting like a JRK toward Harold. Edward Cullen. Supposed to be out of school to mid-May, the handsome vampire had been allowed back in class with a warning after his parents pleaded the director to let him back. When he arrived, many students shot him sneers or disgusted glares, but he ignored them all. Sure, he was furious for this, but he was even more furious toward the one responsible for his predicament. Harold Anderson. Nothing would have happened if this freak had just let him talk to Bella, but no. That thing couldn't mind his own business. In Edward's mind, it was Harold's fault if he had confined at home for days. It was also Harold's fault for being seen like a pest by everyone. One day, he will teach this guy a lesson he would never forget. But this had to wait, as he wanted to see one person in particular, Bella. However, when he saw her arriving at school with him, Edward had been shocked by her new appearance but also of her new scent. Her scent, which usually smelled like freesia and lavender, was no more. In fact, Bella's scent was similar to Harold's. With horror, Edward could also smell the scent of bear on the chocolate-eyed girl. After a moment of stupor, a growl escaped Edward's throat as he glared hatefully at them both. It didn't take a genius to understand that Bella was no more human. His fists tightened as his entire body was filled with nothing but anger and hatred. Anger at Bella for becoming an animal and hatred toward Harold for turning her into one. She was supposed to be his and only his. But now it was impossible. If he dared to inject her his poison, she would die because her werebear's side will not allow his venom to turn her into a vampire. Turning away from the two, Edward went toward a secluded part of the school where his mind started planning how to get revenge of those two for hurting him, not only Harold but Bella as well. You will pay, both of you will pay, he growled to himself with an evil smirk slowly growing on his face. Now he had to think of how to take revenge on them. At the same time, as Harold was making his way to arithmetic class, he couldn't help but feeling that something bad was going to happen sooner or later, but shrugged it once he sat near the love of his life who shot him a radiant smile. Returning it, his happiness quickly faded when Edward Cullen passed through the class's front door. The vampire paused to stare at both him and Bella with a cold expression before quickly leaving. Harold's earlier feeling returned back full force and swore to keep an eye on the guy. Even if Bella was stronger now, she wasn't ready to fight vampires yet. Maybe intimidate them but not fight them. We will have to double the training sessions, the dark brown-haired young man thought to himself with narrowed eyes before looking back at the front where their teacher started the today lesson. As his side, Bella had also noticed Edward's look toward her and couldn't help but being a bit worried. Glancing at her soulmate, she saw him harboring a serious expression on his face, meaning that he had surely seen Edward's expression as well. The reddish-brown-haired young woman knew that expression and could understand what's going to happen later. More training for her. Time skip. The following days had been pretty peaceful so far. Maybe a bit too peaceful, in fact. Ever since they entered school, Harold and Bella, along with many of the Cullens, were taken aback by Edward's new behavior. The vampire seemed to ignore them completely and hadn't tried to talk to Bella or insult Harold in that matter. Alice, Jasper, Emmett and Rosalie found this to be pretty suspect, as they knew the hatred Edward held toward the dark brown-haired young man with blue-green eyes. So to see him acting like the guy in question didn't existed. It was troubling. Even stranger, Edward seemed to act as if Bella wasn't at school, not even glancing at her once if she passed by. Harold had instantly decided to keep an eye of the guy, as his instincts were telling him that the vampire had something in mind. Bella, seemed pleased by the change, but even tried her best to not look at Edward or even speak to him. Why? because her newly formed instincts were telling her to be wary of him. However, because she recently became a bear, she quickly brushed those thoughts aside, telling herself that she was being paranoid. If only she knew what was going to happen. For days after classes started, it was already Friday and students were stepping out of the high school, ready to head back home. As usual, Bella and Harold were walking side by side as they headed toward the parking where laid their respective vehicles. Waving at their friends, the two of them approached their vehicles. "Thank you, Great Bear, it's finally over." The dark brown-haired young grumbled under his beard as he stood in front of his motorcycle. Bella giggled in amusement at the look on his face, which caused him to shot her a small glare of fake annoyance. "It wasn't that bad," the reddish, brown-haired young woman retorted with a smirk. Harold shot her a deadpan expression that caused her to snicker softly. He only sighed at this, but then he noticed something at the corner of his eyes: Edward Cullen. A growl escaped his throat at the sight of the vampire who, upon hearing it, turned his head to look at him. The two stared at one another dead in the eyes. Harold's blue-green eyes showed nothing but distrust and hatred, while Edward's yellow eyes showed nothing but coldness. The stares stopped when Bella's voice caught Harold's attention. "Are you listening to me?" "Huh?" he intelligently replied as he looked back at her. Bella's arms were crossed under her bust, tapping her foot in annoyance as her chocolate eyes narrowed at him. "Sorry love, what did you say again?" Harold inquired her with embarrassment as he rubbed the back of his head with a hand. "I said, do you mind if I came to visit this weekend?" Bella asked him calmly, but her eyes told him that she wouldn't take no for an answer. "Sakna Swan, you should know by now that you are welcome to my domain anytime," Harold retorted with a small grin. Bella's left eye twitched as a grin grew on her face. "I wanted confirmation, Mr. Anderson." Harold snorted at the answer before gently pulling her into a kiss, which she happily returned. Behind them, Edward was looking at the scene with jealousy, anger, and hatred. The vampire wished it was him kissing Bella, not that thing. Disgusted, Edward quickly left the scene before approaching his family, who looked ready to leave. However, he then stopped on his track as an idea passed through his mind. An idea of how to possibly hurt Bella in the long terms. Internally smirking evilly to himself, Edward looked back at his family, whose back were turned, and quickly tossed on his stuff in the bushes. "Hey, you should head home without me." "And why that?" Rosalie asked him with narrowed eyes as she looked at him. Jasper, Alice, and Emmett were equally curious of his answer. "I forgot something in class," Edward answered while looking through the stuff in his bag. "What did you forgot?" Alice asked him with a raised brow. It was odd Edward, like the rest of them, wasn't one to forget his stuff in class. But hey, first time for everything, they said. However, Alice couldn't help but feeling like Edward had another motive to stay behind. Glancing at Harold and Bella, the pixie-like vampire was a bit relieved to see them climbing their respective vehicles before driving out of the parking to their homes. "One of my notebooks," Edward replied casually. "Well then, see you home," Emmett said with a shrug before heading away. "Don't take too much time," Jasper warned him as he followed the taller vampire, leaving Edward, Alice, and Rosalie behind. A short followed this until Rosalie shot a suspicious look at Edward before rushing after her husband. Alice, looked at Edward before saying in a soft tone, "If you want, I can help you." "No, I will be fine on my own," Edward quickly responded as he went back into the school, without giving her the time to say more. Alice was taken aback by the answer, but seeing him enter the school soothed her suspicions as she turned around to head where Emmett, Jasper, and Rosalie waited for her. As the quartet of vampires left the area, Edward waited for at least a minute to be sure that they weren't around before stepping back out again. Once they were now out of sight, the vampire then looked toward where Bella went with a smirk. Looking around to be sure that no one was watching, Edward then ran away from there, becoming a blur because of how fast he was. Of all the Cullens, Edward was the fastest of them all. Following Bella's scent, the vampire didn't long before arriving before where she probably lived. Hiding in a tree, Edward looked at the building standing before him. It was a small house, with white wooden siding and 2 bedrooms on the 2nd floor. Then he saw 2 figures standing in front of a window and recognized the 2 of them, Charlie and Bella Swan. Father and daughter were speaking about something, unaware that Edward was spying on them. Thanks to his sharp sense, he could hear them clearly. "Charlie, can I go to Harold's home tomorrow?" Bella asked her father with an almost pleading look. "Again? Didn't you went there last weekend?" Charlie asked his daughter with a hint of amusement. "So? At this rate, I might start calling you married." The sheriff commented with a laugh, causing his daughter to blush madly. Edward, was not amused as his fists clenched in anger. "But yes, you can go. Mr. Anderson is a fine young man," Charlie added after a moment of amusement. "Thank you, Charlie," Bella said as she hugged her father tightly. The old man chuckled in amusement while wincing at how strong her grip was. Noticing this, Bella quickly released him while apologizing. "It's fine. At what time will you leave tomorrow?" "Maybe around 9 a.m. and it's Harold's turn to pick me." Bella responded with a pensive look at first before it turned into a grin. Her father snorted at the last part. "I see now. I think I should start dinner now," Charlie said with a wave of his hand to dismiss her. Bella nodded before going upstairs to do her homework while her father headed straight to the kitchen, wincing as his ribs hurt him a bit thanks to his daughter's hug. Edward's smirk turned feral as he looked at where Bella disappeared. "Enjoy your time with your father, Bella, because he won't be with you for long," the vampire thought to himself before dashing away with a sinister cackle. Meanwhile, in her room, Bella, who was sitting on her desk, shivered a bit. Thinking that the window was open, she went to close it before going back to her homework. She didn't know it, but her world was about to change definitely. Time skip. It was almost 9 a.m. and Bella and Charlie were waiting on the porch for a certain dark brown-haired young man to come. For good measure, the chocolate-eyed girl called her soulmate the previous night to remind him it was his turn. Thankfully, he hadn't forgotten and promised to be there before 9 a.m. However, he was still not there. "I hope he had a good reason to be late," Bella grumbled softly to herself as she crossed her arms. Charlie shot his daughter an amused look as he stood by her side. "I hope so as well," he thought to himself with a shiver. His daughter could be really terrifying when she wanted to be, but he would be lying to himself if he said he would not enjoy the sight of Harold Anderson being scowled by Isabella. Then the sound of a motorcycle caught their attention and they turned their heads to see Harold coming toward them with his Harley-Davidson. The young man was fully equipped for the ride: black boots, a dark blue pants, a blue jacket with a roaring bear drawn in the back, white gloves. The helmet itself was black in color. They both watched as Harold parked his vehicle right in front of them before using both hands to remove the helmet from his head. With a sigh, Harold shook his head, to get rid of the hairs in his eyes before looking at them with an apologetic look. "Sorry I'm late, but traffic was a.b." the young man said to them with an embarrassed grin. He sweated a bit at the look he received from Bella, but he shot her one saying, "I will explain later." Sighing, the young woman approached her boyfriend before kissing him on the lips. He internally chuckled as he kissed back. "You're forgiven for now," Bella whispered to her boyfriend with a dark grin that caused him to shiver with slight fear. Bella, proud of what she did, looked back at her father, who looked amused at the two before his expression turned curious in an inquisitive way. "May I ask what the two of you plan to do today?" Bella opened her mouth to say something in response but didn't have the time to because of a certain someone. "Nothing of that sort, I can assume you, Charlie. I plan for the two of us to have a lovely swim in the river near my home and maybe fishing for a bit," Harold explained to the sheriff, who nodded his head. "What else?" Charlie asked him with a raised brow. "Well, maybe we will actually do some homeworks together and play society games," Harold began to say before being interrupted by Bella, who said those words. "Forget about the homeworks. I already did mine last night." Harold blinked at this but quickly regained his composure as he retorted with a hint of amusement, "Look like I will have to think of something else then." Charlie snorted in equal amusement before looking at him with a serious expression. "Be good with my daughter, Mr. Anderson." "Please, old man, when was I ever bad with your lovely daughter?" Harold replied with a playful grin. Bella blushed at those words while Charlie shot him a small glare muttering, "Cheeky brat." Harold smirked at the sheriff while Bella shook her head with fond amusement at the entire scene. Soon, Isabella gave her father a little hug before climbing on the motorcycle after putting on the helmet Harold brought for her. "When are you coming back, Bella?" Charlie asked his daughter before Harold started the engine. "Tomorrow morning," Bella responded with while wrapping her arms around her soulmate's body. Charlie nodded at his daughter before looking at Harold and nodding his head at the youngster, who looked ready to leave. The dark brown-haired young man nodded back at the sheriff before starting the engine. Charlie watched as his daughter and her boyfriend drove away from their previous spot, leaving him alone. A part of him was happy for his daughter to have found such a good young man, but the other part was still fairly overprotective of her. The fatherly part of him. While he knew that Bella could take care of herself, he was still her father and it was his job to worry about her. His eyes followed the two as they slowly disappeared out of sight. Then with a small sigh, Charlie turned around to re-enter his home. As he closed the front door, he didn't saw the young man who stepped out of the bushes with an evil smirk on his face. It was none other than Edward Cullen. A few moments ago, he told his family that he was going out to hunt for a bit. Carlisle had been hesitant at first as none of the other children wanted to go out and Esme managed to convince her husband to let him go. After promising to stay on their territory, the vampire took off into the forest. However, he wasn't out to hunt but for vengeance. Edward ran straight toward the Swan residence and arrived just as Harold was telling Charlie of what he and Bella planned to do today. The vampire, once again, felt a pang of jealousy but quickly disappeared to be replaced with determination. Bella had rejected him for an animal and she will pay for her choice, or rather someone will pay for her choice. He had been pained when she took Harold as her mate instead of him, and he will show her how it felt by taking someone dear to her. Who, you may ask? Her parents, or at least one of the parents. While he didn't know where the mother lived, Bella's father, him was well known as he had seen him talking to Carlisle once and right about yesterday. Edward smirked toothily as he slowly approached the front door. Charlie Swan will die today. But then he stopped as a thought passed through his mind, the treaty. Not the one with Harold but the one with the wolves. Carlisle had promised that none of his coven would attack a human if he killed Charlie. The treaty would be broken, a war would occur and his family would suffer greatly. After a few seconds of thought, Edward had the perfect solution. Charlie Swan will die, but he won't use the habitual method, meaning not drinking the man's entire BLD system. He will simply use what he had at disposal. Smirking evilly, Edward resumed his approach before stopping right in front of the door. The ring bell resonated once the vampire used it, and a few seconds later, Charlie opened the door to greet him. "Hello, young man, what can I do for you?" the sheriff first asked before looking at the newcomer with inquisitive eyes. "You are one of Mr. Cullen's children, aren't you?" "Yes, Edward Cullen," the vampire politely said as he extended a hand to shake. "Charlie Swan again, what can I do for you?" Charlie asked him again while giving him a handshake. "Can I come inside?" "I need to talk with you," Edward explained in a calm tone. Meanwhile, Harold and Bella arrived at their destination. While the former parked his vehicle in the garage, Bella got rid of her helmet with a sigh of relief. Soon, the young man did the same, and once they both got rid of their helmets by putting them in a large trunk, the two of them entered the main house where they were instantly greeted by a certain blonde bear. "Harold! Bella!" Ayanna roared gently at them as she approached the two. "Hey girl," Harold replied with affection as he hugged her head. "Hello, Ayanna," Bella greeted her boyfriend's familiar with a smile while petting the top of her head. Harold watched the interaction with a smile, happy that the two of them seemed to like one another. "So love. What do you want to do now?" he asked her with a grin. "I thought you said we would be heading Tati River." Bella asked him back with a grin of her own. "Yes, I did, then we should go," Harold said with a chuckle before looking at Ayanna. "Want to come with us to the river?" he asked her with kindness. "Fishing or swimming?" the blonde bear asked him back with a grin. "Both," Harold retorted with a chuckle. "Count me in then." Ayana happily responded. Ayana is coming with us, love, the young man said to his soulmate, who smiled at those words. Great! Harold found himself laughing at the girl's excitement before the three of them left the wooden house to head straight toward the river. At the same time, Edward Cullen stepped out of the Swan residence with a mad grin on his face as his yellow eyes showed nothing but glee and mad satisfaction. Now Bella, you will know the true meaning of pain, he stated to himself before opening his mouth to release a maniacal laugh that echoed throughout the forest, scaring some of the birds in the process. So alright folks, that's all for today. Stay tuned for part 7. Do subscribe, like and share for more such videos. Also check out the story and author Asian Lionheart 310 on fanfiction.net. Press the bell icon to be notified first on release. See you in the next video. Till then, goodbye.